You might say this is the new edition of the Sophie Scholl Society, and you're here and saying, who is Sophie Scholl? Well, that's the individual who joined with others to make up what was called an anti-Nazi resistant movement during the Third Reich in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Here she gathered with others who were like-minded to talk about, first of all, theology and philosophy. And as they began to talk about it, they realized we need to do some political action given the political climate we are in. So from that, this White Rose Society distributed leaflets throughout Germany. And those leaflets were very subversive. They didn't have the freedom of the press. And because they didn't have the freedom of the press, what they distributed got them in big trouble. It got them into huge trouble, so much trouble that they went to a kangaroo court, basically. And there they were convicted. The guilty verdict resulted, and Sophie, Hans, and I believe the other one was Christopher Probst, lost their heads. They suffered at the guillotine. Well, in memory of what they do, we want to continue this kind of discussion with them. We notice that we're not under the Third Reich, but we are part of a community in which we can express our views, and why not express them in a day and age where we hear so much emotional verbiage out there that there's really no talk of substance regarding ideas and the philosophy behind it. So as we go into this time, we're going to be having panel discussions, a round table, not just with people of like-minded views. We want to encourage people who have different views to come because we want to be an example of what it is to carry on civil discourse in such a polarized political climate we are in. And people can feel free to share those views without feeling like they're going to have their heads cut off or they're going to be so marginalized that they have no point of view at all. No, we want to encourage discussion. And we want to encourage this discussion in such a way where we develop our politics based on sound philosophy and, in many of our cases, good theology. Others may not choose to have a theological point of view. That's okay. What we want to do during this time is let views be voiced and to debate them, to converse with them in such a way that will help de-escalate some of the rancor that we hear today, whether it's on the radio, television, or what we read in the newspaper. Oh, speaking of rancor, I had somebody just make this comment about me the other day. You are the white Christian nationalist view from the church of I hate you, of letting them starve and letting them stay sick. Well, I was just expressing a view about Medicaid and how expensive it is in our state and what the state might consider with respect to the debt that continues to increase in our state of New York. So with that in mind, we want to talk about matters civilly. And with me today is Garrett Kane. Garrett, welcome to the first new edition of the Sophie Scholl Society.
Thanks, Mel. I'm glad to be here.
And Garrett, just briefly, tell us what point of view you come at our political situation.
Well, I'm a libertarian. As of the late summer of 2018, I got involved with Larry Sharp's governor campaign. And prior to that, I was a Republican, but had libertarian leanings because I picked up on Ron Paul when he ran for the Republican nomination 2 different cycles. And his ideas really rang true with me when he ran. I didn't know what a libertarian was at that point, but that got me digging. And Honestly, I was probably a libertarian closer to 2016 because of Ron Paul and Gary Johnson's influence. But I held out in the Republican Party just to have a voice in the primaries because the Libertarian Party was not officially recognized in New York, so thus we didn't have a presidential primary. So I stuck around to hopefully, if Ron Paul made it around in the primaries or another liberty-leaning Republican trying to sneak on that ballot. But our primary's so late. His son Rand ran in 2016, but had dropped out by the time it came around to us. I don't think Rand is as libertarian as his father, but he was going to get my vote for the presidential primary, but he dropped out. And finally, I just had a change of heart. I said, if that's all you're sticking with the Republican Party for, then just go where your heart leads you. And that was the Libertarian Party in 2018.
So tell us what a libertarian is.
Well, it's based on actually classical liberalism. The term liberal has recently been sort of hijacked by what is the left wing of American politics now, whereas a classical liberal was a description of basically a lot of the principles our country was founded on. The writings of John Locke, more recently Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises. Those are all classic libertarian authors. But the libertarian principles mainly is a very small, limited role of government and the respect of that government to the point of ensuring the natural rights that our country was founded on, such as the right to property, the right to govern yourself, basically to live your life however you wish as long as you don't infringe on those natural rights of others.
Would there be a president in our history as a country that you would say, yeah, that individual embodied libertarian principles?
It was kind of some of the earlier presidents and some of the framers of the Constitution. I think James Madison is certainly one. Past that, we've had some liberty-leaning presidents. Reagan was definitely had some aspects. He was trying to revive more of a small government type of policy where people took control of taking care of each other versus handing that off to government. Obviously, the policies leading up to his presidency made that a tough battle with the rise of progressive policies, like you say, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. As much as those policies get touted for what they did for the short period of time, I think today we're kind of faced with a situation of those chickens coming home to roost, because you get far enough down the road, those policies aren't fiscally solvent, yet we keep funding them by increasing our debt. So.
Yeah, and the chickens coming home to roost would refer to this excessive debt.
Yep.
That has piled up over the years.
Sure. And it's not just about dollars and cents. I really think progressive policies where the government is the answer to a lot of problems that are generally just the human condition, inequality of wealth, healthcare. The more we've handed those off to government in the last 50, 60, 100 years, the less people feel responsible for those types of things. So I think it's definitely been as much of a psyche thing as it has a financial, to where we're complacent that the government will take care of these things, albeit in reality they don't take care of them very well. But it still, I think, leads to that complacentness in the culture.
Yeah. Libertarian, I love them. I appreciate what they do with respect to getting the country back to thinking about free market principles, that free market economy, also with civil rights, that is, rights that we see being infringed upon, such as the Fourth Amendment.
Yep.
And though I wouldn't consider myself a libertarian, I feel like a libertarian is definitely a friend of me. I would put myself maybe in the category of a conservative, but I think we need to distinguish conservative because if people observe politics today, they hear a term neoconservative. And believe me, I'm not one of those. Because neoconservatives, though they may advocate for the free market system, which oftentimes I think they get involved in crony capitalism as well.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, they take an interventionist point of view when it comes to foreign policy.
Absolutely.
Stick our nose into other countries' business, so much so that you put the military there. Mm-hmm. And as if to say we can impose democracy on them and they will comply.
Yeah, and I just read a great book by George Will, a conservative columnist who used to write in the Washington Post a lot, called Conservative Sensibility, and he speaks to that sort of the corruption of the label conservative, and he calls for a return to what classic conservatives, they value the free market, they value small government, and the principles of the Constitution narrowly defining the roles of government, and really says, there's no place for that other side, which you're describing as neocon, because that's not conservative. It overextends our national resources. It puts our men and women in uniform in harm, and it also, leads to what's called blowback, to where instead of, spreading democracy, we're building up angst in these cultures that see us as an occupier. To where, I think as Americans, we do need to reach out and we do need to have good relationships with our countries, but I think we do that through trade, through charity, through missionary work, where you go with a Bible in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other, versus guns and bombs and military bases. And I think you make more headway in spreading democracy when you do it like that versus a military intervention style.
I heard the word blowback. Did you hear Garrett say that word, blowback? I think of Afghanistan in the late 70s, where Russia penetrated into Afghanistan. And what was the United States doing in a very covert way? Funding those Islamicists. And as they got involved there, isn't it interesting to see how we observed what took place in Iran in 1979 and eventually 2001, September 11th, when you go the route of interventionist foreign policy with the military, you can expect blowback. That's why I am not a neoconservative. And unfortunately, there's quite a few of them in our national politics, in Congress, House of Representatives, as well as the Senate. So I'd consider myself more of a paleo-conservative, old school conservative.
Constitutional conservative.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, go by the principles of the founders. Mm-hmm. Read the Constitution according to its original meaning. Not meanings that a court wants to impose on it. And if you do that, government reach will be very limited. People's freedom will be greatly expanded, so that the old school conservative and classical liberal basically are on the same page.
Yeah, there's a quote in George Will's book. It's near the beginning, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me. But he says the classical liberal, or the libertarian, the modern libertarian movement are now the fire keepers of the classic liberal policy. And he gives a couple nods to modern libertarianism and how we've evolved from classical liberal. We're not a perfect party, in terms of being a party. We've only been around since the early 60s, but we're, I wouldn't say we're evolving, because we have a set of principles that we stick to, but as we get different people coming from the other two political persuasions into our movement, it's kind of an ever-changing vibe, I guess you'll call it, in the Libertarian Party.
You brought up a quote. I asked Garrett to bring a quote. I have a quote too, and we're going to talk about those quotes, which each of us have come up with today. Garrett, you want to start off with a quote you have?
Yeah, I'll go with my first one, which is a little bit longer, and it's really pertinent to what we're trying to do, I think, with the Sophie Scholl Society. And it was by Ryan Fournier, who I do not see eye to eye on every issue with. I forget the name of the college, but he was a young man, and during Trump's run, he started a group of college students called Millennials for Trump. Now, I'm not against Trump. I'm not for Trump. I'd give him credit where it's due, and I criticize him where he needs it. But I give this young man credit as like a college sophomore, I think he was, for wanting to get his hands dirty in politics and get active and talk about it. And his quote is, "Being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion has led to a lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should have been taught was how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic."
Wow. Repeat that quote again.
And Larry Sharp used this quote during his campaign run. He'll still throw it up on social media, but I absolutely love it. Being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion, as we all kind of were raised for probably 2, 3, 4 generations now, just a faux pas that, you don't bring that up during dinner with your folks or whatever, has led to a lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should have been taught, and what I'll hopefully teach my children and whoever I can pass this on to, is to how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic.
Excellent quote. I want to have that in my memory bank as well, because I think you brought up the 2 topics that we've been taught not to talk about.
Right.
And I love it how he just interjects that profound thought into telling us, or into advocating for discussions about things that are very pertinent and relevant.
Yeah.
And how has that quote impacted you?
I keep it in the back of my mind, and it's a challenge sometimes to cool what are very often very passionate feelings and emotions. And usually I'm good at that. Sometimes I trip up and, get a little heated, but then that thought comes back and I say, well, okay, time to make your apologies and do better next time. But I think, when you get in a setting like this, or when you go into the discussion with that in your mind, it really helps.
Yeah, I just want to keep that one in mind, because even in my own family, it's like a subject matter you tread carefully.
Yep.
And you do want to speak carefully, but not to the extent where you're just afraid to talk about it.
Yep. And that's the thing. It shouldn't be as uncomfortable as it makes it. I don't know if that's necessarily an instinct reaction or if that's a conditioned reaction. I'd like to think it's a conditioned reaction, but it's probably a mix of both. But I think, at this day and age, it's really important that we get over that initial uncomfortableness and make it more the norm than it is now.
Right. And here, Garrett and I are basically on the same page when it comes to politics and religion and faith. But again, we want to invite people who have a very different point of view than us. That's why we want the progressive. We want the socialist. We want the Democrat. I'd just like to have a moderate come on and share their point of view, and to have it be done in a civil kind of way. So that's great. One quote you can take with you today from that person's name again, Garrett?
Ryan Fournier.
Fournier. Okay. That quote one more time.
Being taught to avoid talking about politics and religion has led to a lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should have been taught was how to have a civil conversation about a difficult topic.
Did you hear the word civil? Understanding? Mm-hmm. We need to see how those two go together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're distinguishable, but they're not totally separate. You can't separate them even in our own declaration, because there it says, basically our creed as a nation, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I have a quote. Alexis de Tocqueville, that French philosopher guy who came over here to America and observed how unique this culture was. And this is what he said. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality in liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude. And I would agree with that and also add, socialism talks about an equality of outcomes. Outcomes, meaning you hear about it with income redistribution, trying to even it up through a government force that does this. And I don't think that's the type of equality our founders and framers were talking about.
No, I think they were focused more on equality of opportunity versus equality of outcomes. And that's a tough one. You know, how do we, or how does government ensure equality of opportunity? Because obviously there's a wide spectrum of opportunities that people can be born into in this country. And how heavy-handed, if any-handed at all, government should play a role in evening those out. But I think some of that is caused basically by the government trying to do too much to begin with over a long stretch of time. Like I said at the beginning, it's kind of like we've been conditioned through 50, 60 years of progressive government to just let go and let government solve those problems. And they're, by and large, not very good at solving them, to where, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get back to, okay, it's time to, government's not an option anymore. We have to figure it out as a society. The second quote I got, which is it follows this, is from Milton Friedman, and he said, "The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem." So I think that's a good place to put that quote.
Right, because I think we see it, I hope we're seeing it, that as the government gets more involved from things like medical care, education, Social Security, what we see is a new set of problems. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that set of problems have to do with cost and, in particular, debt. And we need to look upon debt, I think, as an immoral action that is being handed off to the next generation. Tell me about that Friedman quote again. Read that one more time.
The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem.
Anything you'd like to comment?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is the war on drugs. I mean, obviously government took it upon themselves to solve this perceived problem that there was drug use increasing. It really fired up. I mean, there was some drug control policies as far back as the early 1900s with the influx of Chinese immigrants out west, and they brought with them, a culture of using opium, and that was, I think, kind of a shock when people saw that. So those were some of the first drug laws that were specifically targeted towards, Asian people out west and that. But it really kicked into high gear with the Nixon administration. Well, I think Nixon got scared because he saw both the countercultural revolution and, in hindsight, we see that it kind of just ran its course and, nothing really happened. I mean, there were some tragic cases of people getting wound up in addiction because of that, but the overall harm to society from that was very little. But, I could see, it's a scary thing when it first happened and Nixon saw that, and he saw, the increase of the marijuana use from sort of the jazz culture that was a little bit leading up to the 60s counterculture. But we went way overboard, and we've kind of turned this war on drugs into a giant monster that we can no longer control in terms of like the cost. And I really do think that it, in a lot of cases, it does more harm than good. And I worked in drug policy reform a little bit when I was going to college, and there was someone there that had a quote that you can get over an addiction, but you never get over a conviction. And that's one of the hardest things in the war on drugs, to where the driving force behind it is cops, guns, handcuffs, and prison time, which, someone who's trapped in drug addiction, the last thing they need is a criminal record, because thank God they get over their addiction, that paper trail of arrests and jail time is with you forever, and it can handicap your opportunities of what you can do. You may be reformed as a person, but on paper, on a job application, it's hard to tell that.
Yeah.
And that's what you hand off. When you're out there in the job market, a lot of times in today's age, you're just handing it to HR. They don't see your face. You don't get a pre-interview with your application. They just see it. They run your name. They see, oh, well, yeah, dealing drugs, possession of drugs. Well, next.
Yeah, you can get over an addiction, but you can't get over a conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I hadn't heard that quote before.
Yeah, it was that stuck with
Makes me think, because I'm still batting this issue of drugs back and forth on my mind. Because I feel like it so devastates society. How much should government be involved in it? I mean, I feel like if a person is on drugs, commits a crime such as theft or murder or anything like that, indeed, that responsibility for that theft and murder has to be upheld.
Absolutely.
But you wonder, with the drug simply in and of itself, should we be dealing with it in the same way as we have been?
I don't think. And, the people have this image in their mind of this person who is high on drugs out there committing rampant crime, where the reality is usually the person who is out there doing crime as a drug addict is doing that crime because they're out of money to buy the drugs that they need. So it's not necessarily the effects of the drugs that makes that person violent. It's the lack of that drugs that they have an addiction to that drives them to do the crime that we associate with the drugs. And it's a scary thing to propose to people that, we should just put these Schedule I drugs at the counter at CVS. I mean, that's a shock, right? That seems like a terrible idea. But as soon as you bring it out of the black market into the white market, you know where it is. And this sounds scary too. The price comes down on it, so it's cheap. That, for those people that are unfortunately addicted and need to have their daily dose of it, yes, it does make it easier for them to get that. But the positive of that is it's in the light. It's there at one spot. And if someone's selling black market, drugs on the side, sure, throw the book at them. Go after them. But when you have a spot to where it's being distributed, that opens the door to, we build a rehab and counseling center right next door to CVS. And there's nothing stopping us in terms of laws for you, me, or anybody else standing outside that drugstore saying, hey, if you don't want to do this every day for the rest of your life, why don't you come over here?
Yeah.
But now it's hard for me and you or anyone else who wants to reach those people. I mean, where are we going to go? To the crack house down on 10th Street? But if you make that a central point, and I'm not saying we're going to get there right away, probably not, in our lifetime, but I think we just need to think of what's going to produce results and what's going to respect that individual's dignity, and go into it with a hope that sure, there's hard cases. There's people that are probably going to be addicts for the rest of their life and die. But, there's a good percentage out there, I think, that if, they just get in front of the right people enough times that they can turn it around.
So as you see this alternative policy undermining the black market, do you see it also affecting the Mexican drug cartels?
Oh, absolutely. And not just the Mexican drug cartels. Look at the inner city culture in this country. It's driven by two different things: the war on drugs and the welfare state. And in a lot of cases, there's a pretty good division of labor there. The fathers usually aren't in the picture. And a big reason for that is that the mothers can get more benefits if the father is not. So in a lot of cases, I think this is a conscious thing. The mother can work the social service welfare system, and the fathers oftentimes are working the black market for drugs. In the music, the music that comes out of that culture is all built around glorifying black market drug dealing. Now, let's just say, for instance, we pull the switch and create a model like I mentioned before. There's no more glamour in that. That's not an opportunity for a 16-year-old kid. He's got to go get a lawnmower or start doing landscape and doing something positive.
Wow.
You pull the rug out from that whole industry, and it's no longer an option. So what's the next option? Well, take that $12.75 an hour job at Tim Hortons instead of selling crack on the street corner.
Yeah. Now you're listening and you say, I have a different point of view. Well, if you'd like to, come on and share what your point of view is concerning this whole issue of drugs. What you feel the remedy is. We're open on this program to have ideas shared openly. And as we close out our first show of this new edition of Sophie Scholl, certainly on the front burner is this issue of impeachment. Impeachment. What are your thoughts?
Sad. Really. I mean, it's disheartening. And I don't have all the information. I just feel like it's going to get us into a cycle of no matter who the next president is, the impeachment trial will start on January 1st of that inauguration, or at least the work up to it.
Right.
And maybe, the other side of me says is that maybe this whole impeachment power that was written into our Constitution hasn't been used enough. I mean, I think there's definitely precedents in both of our lifetimes to where maybe it should have been used and wasn't. But I don't. It's a huge distraction, and I don't know how it's going to work out. But it's a shame that we can't have people in office with enough integrity to avoid even the speculation of it, and B, that if it is a thing to where the one side is just reaching for something, that it's going to snowball in the next few presidential terms.
Yeah, what I find very frustrating about it is seeing how the prosecuting side is governing it. Meaning, I thought Marsha Blackburn, the senator from Tennessee, is right on the mark. The House takes care of the process of impeachment, whereas the Senate reviews that process. In other words, the Senate is the jury of the process that took place in the House. And now I'm hearing talk where the Senate is being told, well, you need to get more witnesses. But is that the role of the Senate? Should not that be the exclusive prerogative of the House? Also, I think what somebody else said, it almost seems like we're seeing the left not merely impeach a president and the people who voted for him, but impeaching the Constitution. That may be a little exaggerated, but I almost can see his point. especially when I hear thoughts of let's get rid of the Electoral College. And I feel like this whole process of impeachment is being conducted in a way that the framers did not intend for it to go.
Yeah, I think you could make that argument. And, like I said, I don't have all the information, but it seems like at the root of it is our foreign intervention policy, over the last 60, 70 years. I'm not saying that Ukraine doesn't need some help if there are allies. I just think we've been playing a little too fast and loose over a few generations in terms of how we dole that help out and how much and where it goes. And it sounds like a good idea on its surface. Ukraine is our ally in Russia's threatening invasion. Yeah, we should help them out. We should give them this money. But when the rubber hits the road and that money goes over there, I have some serious doubts in terms of how it's distributed and what happens when the conflict settles down.
There are deeper issues than what's on the surface of impeachment. And I see your point that when you get down to policy, you can see where certain policies can end up heading with unintended consequences.
Yep.
Very interesting point of view. And these are the kinds of things that we want to talk about. And you can help us out if you have somebody who would like to join us, because we're just regular citizens. We just like talking about politics. Amen. We like talking about how our faith, or if our faith is atheistic rather than theistic, to talk about it here in a way in which it's civilly done so that we as citizens can contribute to our society in an informed and educated way. Because when you read Sophie Scholl and the White Rose Society, you can see the amount of thought philosophically that went into what they wrote, which the Nazis considered subversive. They were just putting ideas out there, and the Nazis didn't like them. And this is what we want to do. We want to talk about ideas, especially when we can still do it in an open atmosphere without having to worry about being arrested for what we say. So the more we say it, I think the better off we will be able to preserve those liberties and privileges. Hey, Garrett, thanks so much for joining me today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out our first show?
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.
I hope you enjoyed it. And join us again for the next time of our new edition of the Sophie Scholl Society.